Thanks, Alina. I am definitely not an elections expert, and so I will ask questions more than anything else. Obviously, working on security and justice, a lot of the sort of countries that I work in, elections are quite a moment where security before the election and after, and justice after the election are a big deal. And actually, my very first job was in Sierra Leone in the lead up to the 2007 elections, trying to create friendly relations between the security sector and communities in the lead up to that. So I don't know how well we did, but anyway. So there were three kind of areas that I guess I wanted to ask questions about. And they were sort of elections and the role of elections in exacerbating conflict, the role of elections in legitimizing a sort of patrimonial elite, and then the links between elections and development. So in terms of their role in exacerbating conflict, I'd be interested to hear, in the countries that you're each talking about, the extent to which political parties have ideologies and coherent sort of policy platforms, because it seems to me to be lacking in a lot of political parties in fragile states. And I think this sort of lack of differentiation between parties on the basis of ideology or programmatic policies means that politics ends up dividing into potentially more sort of dangerous ways that aren't focused on ideas, but are more focused on either regionalism or ethnicity or religion or whatever. And certainly in Sierra Leone, it seems that a lot of the post-conflict violence has centered around election times and the two major political parties, which unfortunately sort of maps onto regional, ethnic, and religious, to some extent, divides. And interestingly, those divides, I don't think, although you might see this differently, weren't really previously a conflict trigger. But it seems like post-conflict, the politics have sort of made them more likely to be conflict triggers. So I also wondered how elections can change the nature of violence in particular country settings. In terms of legitimizing a patrimonial elite, this gets to some of your points, George. I mean, is there a sense in which elections in post-conflict countries sort of provide a veneer of legitimacy for the elite and for their patrimonial networks rather than genuinely representing people's interests? And I was reading an article the other day about elections in Nigeria, or just broadly the electoral process in Nigeria. And one commentator there referred to elections as a perverse form of modern coronation, which I quite liked. And I think, I take Silas's point that corruption isn't always a bad thing. But one of the problems I think in countries like Liberia, Sierra Leone, Timor-Leste, and probably elsewhere, is that too few people are essentially benefiting from the patrimonialism. It's sort of ending up in too few hands, and in a way, that's what leads people to vote for another party, not because they're interested in the other ideas that the other party has to offer, but it's a sense that okay, that party's had enough time of feeding their patrimonial networks. Let's give somebody else a go. And a question I had, I guess, stemming from that is whether elections can help to build up a social contract if the leaders that result are actually only serving their patrons. And then finally, I guess, on the link between elections and development, and Silas, we talked about this a bit yesterday. I mean, what happens for democracy support when democracy doesn't usher in liberal developmentalism? What happens when actually it ushers in authoritarianism? Or where it demands authoritarianism. So, for instance, in Sierra Leone, I noticed that recently there have been calls on the president, which he's been resisting, to change the constitution so that he can run for a third term under this slogan of, after you comes you kind of thing. And, in those situations, is it democracy, or is it kind of the liberal development that people hope that democracy leads to that wins out? And then I guess the final question I had was actually about the role of South-South cooperation in electoral support. So often, it seems that a lot of the democracy support has sort of come from Western countries, but there seems to be emerging more of a space for peer-to-peer learning on elections. And I know Timor-Leste has been providing a lot of financial and advisorial assistance to Guinea-Bissau in running their now very delayed election, I think. But I wondered, what role you see for that and what problems that might create as well. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. And now we can have a broader round of applause for everybody. Thank you.